Welcome to this explainer, students of philosophy. Settle in because today we're diving into a genuinely grim, dark, gothic fable. And here's the twist. I'm not just your host, I'm actually the subject of our study. I am the Laughing Dragon, quite literally the synthesis of the old world's ashes. Today, I'm going to guide you through my own personal metamorphosis. We're talking about my journey from a jester, totally trapped in the illusions of the heroic age, to becoming a true sovereign of the void. Trust me, this dialectical battle is about to get intense.
Now, before my gold and verdant scales ever hardened, I had to wake up to the absolutely terrifying stakes of the reality we live in. We're all forced into this brutal choice, right? Are you going to burn up in a senseless, purposeless inferno of sheer destruction? Or are you just going to rot away in the frozen, decaying surrender of a silent graveyard? Because honestly, just existing means you're caught right between these two horrific extremes.
And that brings us to the core of what we call the ontological war. Basically, it's a dialectical battle between two massive opposing forces. On one side, you've got the creative destruction of all meaning, and on the other, this stagnant surrender to a primordial void. My mission? I had to dismantle the old heroic order. But I had to be incredibly careful. I couldn't afford to slip into the traps of either extreme, which we define as active or passive nihilism.
So let's look at these two false paths. First up is the Red Judge. He's the total embodiment of purely destructive active nihilism. Imagine a skeletal figure ruling a tribunal of ash, with cold, binary logic, just constantly feeding a purposeless inferno. On the flip side, draped in shadows, is Gibe Chotin, the Twilight Puppet King. He represents passive nihilism. His domain is the mausoleum of stasis, and it's all about spiritual weariness and completely shutting down the individual will. So one wants to just mechanically burn everything to the ground, and the other wants to smother every last spark of life into absolute non-existence.
To survive all that without turning into some monster of ash or a lifeless puppet, I had to evolve. I had to achieve what's known as the absolute I. For you students of the spirit, this is absolutely crucial. It's the final stage where the spirit becomes a truly self-positing force. Think of it as the split mirror of duality made flesh. By metamorphosizing into this draconic entity, I literally became a self-contained universe. I didn't need an external audience to validate me or to generate my fire anymore. I was finally truly free.
Okay, so how did this happen? The path to sovereignty is broken down into 4 parables. It's a visual journey of my metamorphosis. In Parable 1, the very first chapter of my Genesis, I had to burn down the beautiful cages of legacy holding me back. I had to completely incinerate the linear time of the so-called heroic age. Picture this. With a clockwork breath, I ascended the towering architecture of the old world. And from way up there, I exhaled the zero flame. This isn't just fire. It's a metaphysical force that melted away all the social masks of the marketplace. As it spread, it literally incinerated linear time itself, throwing reality all the way back into the chaotic void of Jinnagagop. I completely dissolved the chains of legal and moral authority. I shattered the whole mechanism. But, I didn't just destroy things in silence. My roar was an actual weapon. We call it active laughter. It's this shattering resonance that breaks the spirit of gravity. All those old scripts, the rigid social rules, the illusions we all just blindly followed, they instantly dissolved into sawdust right in front of my undeniable, verdant gold truth.
Now, destruction alone is just the Red Judge's inferno, right? We had to go much deeper. So, for the second parable, to truly metamorphose, I had to take a terrifying, necromantic flight straight into a sensory vacuum known as the maw of the Absolute. I had to literally confront my own ancestral ghosts.
Through the rather dark art of shadow necromancy, I summoned the failed wills of my Volsung ancestors. And let me tell you, their ghosts clung desperately to my verdant wings. But here is the real analytical lesson in sovereignty for you. Instead of letting that genealogical baggage drag you down, you have to use it. I took those ancestral burdens and turned them into absolute fuel for my zero flame, and that is exactly how I survived the ego's eclipse. There's a perfect quote for this stage. Staring into the void mirror to affirm existence amidst verdant absurdity. I looked deep into that absolute nothingness, and instead of blinking or turning away, I affirmed my own existence. Right then and there, I cemented myself as a resurrected archetype. I had successfully deconstructed both the warrior and the judge within myself. But my metamorphosis wasn't done yet. Moving into the third parable, I had to confront the other, colder extreme of our ontological war.
I descended upon the mausoleum of stasis. This is the puppet king's domain. Imagine a silent, gray graveyard intentionally designed to smother every last spark of ambition and creativity in the entire world.
This is where I face the tarantula preachers. These are essentially operational ministers of shame, and they weaponize what we call ressentiment, this toxic, deep-seated resentment. They spit venomous words like equality and moral guilt, just to force strict conformity. They basically want to trap creative spirits in this frantic tarantella, a miserable dance of forced apologies, framing any kind of ambition as a literal crime against the collective calm.
Their whole goal is what's known as the Great Flattening, trying to trap creative spirits under the sovereignty of the mirror. But my countermove? The sovereign flight. I soared right over their guilt trips using the pathos of distance. By emitting a magnetic distortion pulse combined with my active laughter, I completely shattered their silent graveyard. I absolutely refuse to be anchored by their moralistic webs.
Now, even after soaring over the graveyard, the ultimate test was still waiting. The fourth and final parable required one last, incredibly brutal descent. I wasn't just striking at the puppet king anymore. I had to strike at the very floorboards of history itself.
Gripping the chipped axe, which is essentially a metaphysical key, I struck the marketplace. I cleaved right through the floorboards of history and plunged deep into the underworld of the blood. This initiated a brutal war of ontological survival, all to finally cleanse the poisoned ancestral waters of the Volzin curse. It all comes down to this idea: remaking the world by first destroying the sins of the father. That is the only way to become truly free. By diving into that dark abyss and integrating my shadow of sovereignty, I proved that my draconic fire was completely self-sustaining. I wasn't dependent on the past, and I sure wasn't chained to it. I destroyed the sins of my lineage, and by doing that, I earned the right to remake the world.
And that brings us to the climax of our explainer. The dialectic was finally complete. The heroic age was permanently dead and gone. And from those ashes, I emerged as the child of the new dawn, completely ready for a final performance of cosmic play, juggling the stars themselves in a self-contained universe.
In this final state, as the sovereign of the void, I no longer fight against the rhythmic grinding of the world's collapse. Instead, I transform it into harmonious music. I found the true freedom to play. I am the sole architect of my own self-created drama, completely and utterly unburdened by the illusions of the past.
Now, I justify my existence purely through a magnificent, doomed dance upon a grave. I dance on the ashes of all my synthesized old identities. The universe might be inherently absurd, but you know what? I'm laughing at it. My gold and verdant scales are the final vibrant signature of this beautiful frenzy.
So, my fellow students of the ashes, having walked through this grim and beautiful metamorphosis with me, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. If true sovereignty is indeed the freedom to play in a doomed and completely absurd universe, what stars will you choose to juggle when your own beautiful cages are finally reduced to cinders? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the cages around you.